declare us live on this Saturday morning. Awesemo.com. College football DFS picks and betting show. We went through a lot of things to put this live, and I think we've actually done it. Rasa, Matt Gajewski, week 2 or week 3 if you count week 0. Matt, how are you this morning?
Oh man, I'm doing great. About 4 cups of coffee in, ready to break down the slate. Yeah, Saturdays are really early morning for me. Just, it's like Christmas every single week.
It's fantastic. Now, I'm a big Christmas guy. This is, I don't know what you want to call this. 12 games, already 2 down. We're up to 10. We're going to dive right into them because we got a lot to get to here. Chat, thanks for sticking with us. We're starting fashionably late. I had to get my Citadel gear out from the basement rocket. So if you can pump up the likes for us, we do appreciate it right off the bat. We're going to dive in. First game, here we go. Honestly, one of the better ones, even though it's a 23.5-point spread. Tulsa, Oklahoma State. It was supposed to be last week. It is this week. Over under lofty, 66 points. You want to start with Tulsa, or do we want to talk about Chuba Hubbard right off the bat?
We'll get to Chuba.
Okay. Talk to me about these Golden Hurricanes.
They're actually a pretty exciting team. I know they're huge underdogs here, but they're a team that plays really fast. They were second in the country in plays per game last year, and they're pretty balanced. They were 53rd in pass rate. So, right away, you're getting a game with a solid total here. I think there's some plays you want to look at. It's not really going to be Zach Smith for me, just because last week we were giving some strategy stuff, and we talked about these QBs that are just negatives in the run game. Negative 93, I believe, rushing yards on the year last year. Negative 96, sorry. And he only eclipsed 300 yards passing 5 times. So when he's just going for such negative rushing numbers, and we'll talk about the entire field, I'm not getting to him. But his receivers are really interesting. Keelan Stokes, Sam Crawford, the top 2 receivers on that team are back. Stokes had 99 targets last year. Crawford had 90. So those are 2 plays I think you could look to. And then if you're getting real weird, DraftKings continues to misprice players. They have a starting receiver in Juan Carlos Santana at the minimum.
Juan Carlos Santana. Okay.
He was listed as a starter on the depth chart. Take that for what it's worth. A lot of times this happens and these teams aren't exactly the most honest and forthright, but he was listed as a starter and he's 3K.
Yeah, and we talked last week, it was one of the egregious teams, maybe Eastern Kentucky or another. You're not going to find that many guys at flat min that are even going to see the field and possibly some targets. So take that for what it's worth. This Tulsa team, of course, is going to be trailing. They should be in line for some volume, but obviously, I think they're mostly going to be used, in my mind, if you want to run it back. Now, Oklahoma State, they've got firepower across the board. Chuba Hubbard is phenomenal. Really, it comes down to an opportunity cost, but it's one that I think is pretty easy to pay today.
Yeah, with the games that were canceled, I think we had some tough decisions at wide receiver earlier. We lost the UNC receivers, Diami Brown, Daz Newsome are gone. There's a couple guys from Baylor that are gone. So we lost Marquez Stevenson from Houston. Some of the best receivers that you were trying to pay up for are gone. And then Clemson's playing Citadel. We'll get to them. But do you really want to pay up for a guy like Amari Rodgers? We just saw Alex Pierce get scratched from the slate. So really, you're just deciding, do you want to pay up for Tylan Wallace or not? And with so much value on this slate, I think Chuba Hubbard is an absolute lock in cash games. And you have to really make a strong case if you want to fade him in tournaments. He's going to be so owned because of the way the slate lays out with the canceled games and the injuries we're already seeing. If you're just looking to pay up for somebody, I don't know who else you go for outside of Chuba and, maybe ETN.
Yeah, listen, he's going to have the volume. He's going to find the end zone. And I just don't see, in a game with this total, they're 23.5-point favorite. It's hard to imagine he's not involved in some capacity. And it doesn't, we were talking before the show, you're not hamstrung if you go to him. Talk real quick, though. Wallace on the outside is back, returning from injury. You've got Stoner, and then you've got an interesting QB in Spencer Saunders, who, again, we have Chuba, and he's kind of the lightning rod. Do you see any merit to going contrarian within the team and maybe stacking up the quarterback with some pass catchers?
You can. I don't think stacking is a good option with Sanders. He's a little bit expensive at 7,600. In the passing game, he's kind of a game manager. He only averaged 22.5 pass attempts last year. He did get hurt in a couple of games. So I think with full health, maybe he's up around 25 per game. You like Sanders because he runs. He had 3 games over 100 yards, so you're getting the bonus there. But he never once threw for over 300, not a single time last year. So, I mean, you can look to Tylan Wallace, and maybe that would be a contrarian stack. But when Tylan Wallace was healthy, Dylan Stoner wasn't really active. Their third receiver is Braden Johnson. It's just not really an offense I really want to target these game stacks with because Sanders is kind of limited as a passer.
Fair enough. And yeah, the other thing about the stack, and then we can move on because we got a lot of games, you're really allocating a lot of salary. Like, this is not a cheap stack, and we're going to get into those. Like, if you load up Sanders and Wallace and even like, that's a massive cap hit. You would need everything to break right, and you need a lot of cheapies around them.
For sure. And just to playing like Chuba over ETN, this game is at least semi-competitive. It's over a 20-point line, but I mean, like ETN, that line is 45. Like, how long do you think he's going to play?
No, listen, Clemson, and we're going to get to them. They're on the slate. I was a little surprised to see it. That's a totally different type of blowout. This is a game that these teams play frequently. It could be somewhat close through, and then Oklahoma State probably pulls away. The Citadel, spoiler alert, they're not going to win. So it's a whole different level. And in terms of the betting side, which we're definitely going to talk about, listen, there's not much to say on a 23.5 point spread. I'm not touching it. I think like most people, I think this could get out and moving. 66 is reasonable, but not a core play on either side. Let's go to Syracuse and Pitt. These teams, different starts. Syracuse hung around and then it unraveled late against UNC. Pittsburgh had a pseudo warm-up. So I actually want to start with Syracuse, though. What did you make of them against UNC? Are you looking to DeVito? I know that Taj Harris, I would assume, is someone that you're very interested in given the usage he had last week.
This game is a really low total, which it surprised me because both of these teams play really fast and they both pass a ton. So that surprised me right away. I think it's because of Pitt's defense. They have a couple NFL players on there, even with Twyman opting out. But Syracuse's defense obviously got crushed on the run. Normally, you'd want to look to the running backs. Pitt runs a committee, so I'm not exactly as interested there. But on offense for Syracuse, they had offensive line problems again. And Tommy DeVito averaged just 3.6 yards per attempt. He still threw the ball 31 times, so I think he has to be an outside consideration. Against this defense, I'm probably not going to get to him at 5,900. There's other options in that price range. But you mentioned it. If I'm going to target a run back maybe in this game on the Syracuse side, it is Taj Harris, who had an absurd 15 targets last week. That was a 47% target share. He also finished second on the team last year in targets too. He's underpriced for the role in this offense. I think he's a guy you could consider in cash just based on volume. And in this game, if you're stacking, he's the guy I would look to on Syracuse.
Anything else in terms of secondary options for Cuse and like a Jordan, a Quealy, anything of that? Or do you really think it's, as a 21-point dog, maybe just someone like Harris on a run back?
There's a lot of timeshares on this slate in the mid-price range. And Jawar Jordan at 5,900 played on 76% of Syracuse's snaps. And he actually was in on 77% of their run plays. And that surprised me a lot because he's a guy who stands 5'9", 172. He looks like a pass-catching back. But he was actually on the field quite a bit, carried 14 times and had 3 targets. We've seen DeVito throw a ton to running backs. Last year, Neal had 31 targets. Adams had 15 targets. Jarvan Howard had 10 targets. So he's a guy you could maybe use in the mid-range as just, if they get down, hope they throw to the RB a lot, and they probably should with those offensive line concerns. As far as secondary pass catchers, it's Anthony Quealy. We saw Nykeem Johnson and Courtney Jackson in a basically 50-50 timeshare at that third wide receiver spot. So it would be Quealy if you just want somebody playing a full complement of snaps, contrarian compared to Taj Harris.
Yeah, and with so many games, I'm not. Outside of Harris, I don't have a ton of interest. We also, though, I will say, yeah, Pittsburgh looked great. They played Austin Peay, though. So I don't take a ton from that. Obviously, we can't really look at what these guys did, but talk to me about Pickett, 6,600 on this slate, and then the rest of his. You mentioned the committee in the backfield. What do you make of Pittsburgh as a sizable favorite?
Dude, did you see that they decided to shorten quarters in the second half in Austin Peay?
The mega mercy rule, where they just like, I bet games like that, and somehow always Savannah State is involved, and I'm getting like 70 points. And then they're just like, we're going to go running clock because we can't have these teams losing by 90.
Ben, you're out of control betting Savannah State, but
well, that's they've been relegated to I don't even know if they play football anymore. Sad. Very
For
sad.
Pitt, their plays were down obviously because they had shortened quarters. Their pass rate is still fine. Last year, we saw this team running extremely fast. They were 19th in plays per game. Their pass rate was 56%, but they get their entire offensive line back. That should help Pickett. Maybe they run a little bit more because of that. They're just far more experienced. But Taysir Mack, we saw him over 100 targets last year. I don't know why this game is coming in with a 48.5 point total. We know Pitt has a great defense, but both of these teams are going to run so many plays. I think you can look to Mack just as a guy who's probably going to get 10 targets. Their secondary receivers are Shockey Jacques Louis at 4,500. He's going to play on the outside opposite Taysir Mack. He's kind of a burner, and he had 4 targets last week. And in the slot, we'll see Jordan Addison, who's another one complete cheap punt plays. He actually led the team with 8 targets, and he is listed as the starter on the depth chart. So I don't think it was just a function of Austin Peay. I think Jordan Addison is actually going to play a role this year. These are all super cheap stacking options.
So do you look at, because this is where it's very interesting. If you were just, and I do think people will do this, you go to the lobby and you look at what they did last week. You see DJ Turner with the production, but I think that's very misleading. You mentioned Mack should be back. What do you have any interest in DJ Turner, who obviously looked good against a totally different opponent in garbage time?
I don't really. I would just look to the starters here, and it's Taysir Mack first and foremost, because we saw what he did last year with those 105 targets.
So is this a spot, just to round up this game and then we'll move on, where you could go Pickett, Mack Harris as a little stack and build around that?
I do have some of that, yes. And You like Pickett too because he adds something with his legs. He's at 6,600. The volume he's going to receive is certainly worth that price. So Pickett, I think, is an outside consideration in cash. There's a couple guys I like more than him, but you can certainly get there if you end up in between in the price range. And then there's stacking options at every price point. There's a run back on the other side. It's a really nice situation for DFS.
Yeah, that is one of the games I'm looking to as a mini stack there and then build around it. All right. This is one of the ones we just got to get out of the way, but it's good. We'll save some time and then I can talk about more egregious things later in the show. We just mentioned Austin Peay. We get him again. They go to Cincinnati here. This is going to be an absolute demolition. So what do you do? We had Eastern Kentucky on the slate last week. What do you do with Austin Peay? Are they a complete throwaway? Yeah,
they have a 9-point team total. They're 0-2, losing to Central Arkansas, and after that shortened game against Pitt. Their QB is Oatsball. He has a horrific 42% completion percentage, only 40 yards as a rusher, so he's not going to get you there either way. Their lead running back has 21 carries on the year. That's in 2 games. That's not going to get you there. And then their main target leaders, Benico Harley, has 15 targets, and then their second most, targeted player, Eugene Minter's not in the player pool.
Yeah, that would be bold if you could get to him then. All right. On the other side, though, now we have to weigh in what is always very difficult on the other side of Eastern Kentucky was West Virginia last week. And it's hard. And then you look and you've got guys falling in the end zone multiple times and doing some damage. Do we look to? I certainly am not paying up for Ritter. You mentioned Pierce is not expected to play on the outside. Are there other options for the Cincinnati team that we can go to?
The other listed starters on the depth chart were Jay Sean Jackson at 5,100 and Michael Young at 56. He's the Notre Dame transfer. But we're paying, I got my Notre Dame.
Got to get those plugs.
So Jay Sean's 51, Michael Young's 5,600. I don't know why you just don't pay up the extra 300 from Young to get to Taj Harris. Desmond Ritter, he averaged 25 pass attempts last year. He does offer some dual threat ability. He had 650 yards on the ground, but how long do you think he stays in the game? If he attempts 25 passes in a full game, what is this going to look like against, this team in an absolute complete blowout spot against Austin Peay? I'm not targeting any pass catchers. I'm more likely to target some of the backs here. Jared Dokes is replacing Michael Warren. They have Jerome Ford as a transfer coming over from Alabama. They should both see a decent amount of work. 10 to 12 carries, maybe. You're just hoping for efficiency if you play them, it's always going to be tough to measure. 2 weeks ago, Brendan Knox busted against Eastern Kentucky in this situation. Last week, the West Virginia backs both absolutely crushed in this situation. So it's GPP flyers.
Jerome Ford is a guy that I am kind of interested in, you mentioned he's got immediate eligibility over from Bama, 57. I wish he was, hovering around 5. That's more in that sink field range from last week. I could get there if he does see double-digit carries on the ground, maybe. But overall, it's just a game that we know Cincinnati's going to roll them, but they could win, 38-0, and no one really could break this slate. So I think overall, not a game that I'm targeting. Do you see anything else, or is that fair?
No, I think we hit every player I think you're considering. There's going to be some backups that get into this game, but it's not going to be predictable.
Yeah, and obviously, I look at every game betting. I'm not trying to decipher. Will I lay 37.5?
Do you want to bet a team that just shortened quarters last week?
Yeah, that's frowned upon.
Don't bet this game.
Just don't. Wait for college basketball. Austin Peay. They will be in the tournament next year. You can guarantee it. Navy, they talk about looking bad. They are trying to rebound after maybe the worst performance of the opening week against BYU. They were dismantled on Labor Day. They're a 5.5-point dog to Tulane, over under 46.5. Start with the academy, who obviously needs to find an answer at quarterback. They did not look nearly the same running the triple option.
Well, you're definitely not playing their quarterback this week. They're expected to run both Dalen Morris and Xavier Arline. They're very different players. Morris is actually a sizable guy. He's 6'1", 206. He's not like Malcolm Perry whatsoever, the stud from last year. Xavier Arline kind of is. He's 5'9", 165. That's about all I have on them. We do not know who is going to play a majority of the work there. And we know they're not throwing, so there's not stacking options whatsoever. Don't play wide receivers on Navy. You really have to decide if you want to play any of these runners. And they run such a split at every single position, fullback, slot back. I don't know if you can get to anyone.
It's the spot that I think that you can, it's not even wait and see. It's just, and I've talked about this on a lot of shows and a lot of different sports, where you have to get something right twice. Navy could be ineffective and then you're dead. Even if they do rack up some points here, you have to hit the right back that's going to get that production, or it's a QB, and then I really don't know how you get there. So I want to see if they can right the ship. They look lost against BYU. They were pushed around up front. And their defense, which I thought would be okay, really did struggle, which leads me to the Tulane side. They got by South Alabama, who, if you want to play the transitive property game, South Alabama beat Southern Miss to open the year, so maybe that is a decent win. And we've got a mid-range quarterback here in Keon Howard, who I don't think is the worst play in the world. Going to do a little on the ground, not the most efficient passer, but what do you make of the green wave in this spot?
Yeah, so we haven't seen a lot of him, but this is an offense that normally you'd like to target, just not probably against the triple option. They ran 75.1 plays per game. That was 20th in the country last year. Their coaching staff is back, so I expect it to be in that range again this year. But they only passed 39% of the time. That was because they've been running dual threat quarterbacks for the last couple of years. And Kian Howard is that. He had 31 yards on the ground. If we look to his completions, he did throw the ball 30 times. I don't think he gets there this week because Navy, obviously running that triple option, is going to try to kill clock. If you're rostering Tulane players, you hope their defense just gets Navy into 3-and-outs. But the problem with Kian Howard, the problem with the runners, the receivers, they run timeshares at every single position. They have 3 running backs that mixed in for about 30 to 40% of snaps. All of their starting receivers, not a single one of them played over 50% of the snaps.
It's a team that really is middling in so many areas, and you kind of just summed it up with, could somebody emerge? Yeah, but how are we supposed to there's no priority in terms of target share, in terms of game script, and this game is kind of, I worry about Navy keeping them off the field. Even if Tulane wins the game, like Navy can chew up 6, 7, 8-minute drives at a time with the way they run. This game could shorten. I actually kind of lean to the under here because I don't think Navy's offense is going to be effective as well.
Yeah, if I had to take a betting lean, it would be backing Tulane. For some reason, we're seeing some steam come on Navy late. I'm not really sure why. If we just look at the BYU game against Navy, they allowed 6.1 yards per attempt on the ground. BYU does have a good offensive line, but if we look to what Tulane has coming back, they're returning 5 players who've started games, and they actually got a solid transfer coming in from Duke. So I think this is a pretty decent mismatch on the offensive side for Tulane. I think they should be able to run. On Navy, I just don't know who receives the carries.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised. I thought this game was going to climb north of 7, and you just mentioned it's going the other way. not great if you're backing Tulane, but we will see. All right, 4 down, 6 to go. Chat, I see you people. I'm gonna do a little Josh Engelman and ask for some likes. We're moving through these games, and we're getting to a game that I actually really excited to talk about because of all the bad Big 12 showings. Iowa State is at the bottom of the list. Louisiana Lafayette, swift justice last week. LeBlanc, that's what I'm talking about. I love to see it. I love the way this team runs the ball. Levi Lewis is fantastic. They get a much easier opponent here against Georgia State. They're a 16-point favorite. Do we ride with the Raging Cajuns in this spot?
Yeah, I like them. I certainly like them against the spread. As far as plays in DFS, it's tough. Mm-hmm. Levi Lewis is a guy, in that surprising positive game script against Iowa State, only throws the ball 21 times. That's kind of just the way they use him. He's a game manager. He's efficient. He completed 64% of his passes last year, only had 4 interceptions. Somewhat of a dual threat, had 195 yards on the ground last year. But Louisiana keeps him under control in that way. He only bested 300 yards passing on 1 occasion. He's never going to be near the top of your pass attempt leaderboards at the end of the slate. So he's hard to stack with. Peter LeBlanc, he only had the 6 targets. He comes up with a pretty big game, the 82 yards. But he's up at 7K. I don't think you really look to him in this spot. With them being big favorites here, I do expect them to ride the run. Unfortunately, they use 3 backs. You're going to have to decipher between Elijah Mitchell, Trey Ragas, and Chris Smith, who actually mixed in for 23% of the snaps and carried 8 times himself.
It's interesting because, I figured we'd be going into this game saying, you know what? Louisiana left. They were trailing. They were forced to throw. We haven't seen it. Now they'll go to the ground game. We actually got a preview of what they will do in a game like this. And it's going to be efficient, maybe take some shots over the top, but honestly lean on a stable of backs. So I'm with you. I certainly wouldn't recommend chasing LeBlanc. That price it's pricing in what he did, and he caught a over the top touchdown last week. So I don't love that. I do think they have a pretty good handle on this game. And of all the teams, there's tiers of egregious. Georgia State doesn't fall down in like the Austin P bucket, but at the same time, I don't know about this team. I really didn't have much to say. When you look at them, does anything stand out for them?
Their offense does. When we look at teams that are big underdogs, maybe in run back situations, because of course, Louisiana has a decent team total. So if you want to stack this game, or maybe you're just playing a running back and you want to look at a run back, Georgia State runs a pretty aggressive offense. They were 13th in plays per game last year. They only passed the ball 40% of the time. Now, they had a couple of good running backs last year. One of them graduated, and I'm going to parlay this over to their run game. Dustin Coats is 5.5K. I think he'll be the bell cow. They're projected to be trailing by quite a bit. So that is a little bit concerning with his overall carry count, but he had 8 targets last year. I think he's someone that could function in the pass game. Trey Barnett, their starter last year, had 16 catches. So I would maybe look to him as a mid-price option at RB if you need to. Their receivers will see some targets because of this. Cornelius McCoy is 5.2K. Sam Pinckney is 4.8. I don't know. They're not preferred plays, but I think you can look at them.
The one nice thing, and naturally because they're, expected to lose the game, it's not expensive. Like, you have your pick of any skill position player. Coates comes in as the most expensive at 5.5. So you can fit in a flyer here or there, and you don't need a ton. A decent target share should do it, and you can build around a more expensive stack. So it's not an environment that I'm really looking to. I was actually pretty impressed with Louisiana Lafayette's defense. Maybe that was just Purdy being ineffective, but I may take if I'm in a jam, I don't mind rolling the dice with some of the guys you just mentioned, particularly on the outside. I think they'll be trailing. I think they do have to throw here.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And the total's decent in this game. It's 57.5. That's not egregiously low.
No, and on the slate, really, there's nothing. We don't have any 75 or anything like that. Oklahoma State is up there, but other than that, it's mid 50s. UCF, which we'll get to, is north of 60, but this is towards the top of appeal in terms of over-unders. But this is a game I really am excited to talk about, but I'm also very concerned, and I'll tell you why in a second. We've got Boston College going to Duke. I should be saying right now the spread sits at Duke -6, -5.5, because that's where I bet it. it has steamed the other way. Boston College is only a 3.5-point dog now. They are starting. I know you got to get your plugs in for your Fighting Irish. It looks like they have chosen to go with the Notre Dame transfer, at least to start. What do you make of a BC team we haven't seen so far this year?
This is an entirely different team. It kind of reminds me of Georgia Tech a little bit last week. Last week, we made some really good points about targeting uncertainty. So just to bring that up again, it's essentially going to be week one for some teams for some time as we continue to get more and more teams just debuting. So Boston College is one of these teams. They have a brand new head coach, a brand new offensive coordinator in Frank Signetti. He's a weird guy to analyze. He most recently coached with the Packers. Now, he was, I believe, their quarterback's coach in 2018. In that season, the Packers led the league in pass attempts. So basically what we saw from Boston College last year is a team that likes to grind clock, a team that likes to run the ball a ton. Is there a chance that changes this year with the new offensive coordinator? They have the new quarterback in Phil Yurkovich. He's presumed to be the starter. They did mention that potentially both guys will play in this game, so I don't think it's a lock he plays the whole game. But Yurkovich is a former 4-star prospect. He's a dual threat QB, which we love for DFS, and he'll be, I think, contrarian because of this. People just don't expect him to play the whole game. But if you expect Boston College to maybe throw more than they have in years past, you could get some ownership leverage with Kobe White, Zay Flowers. Jalen Gill is an Ohio State transfer, a former 4-star. He comes over, granted immediate eligibility. He's just 4.4K, and he probably plays in the slot for this team. I think there's a lot of reasons to look at Boston College in DFS just because of the uncertainty with the program.
It is, yeah, that is something we did talk about last week. When you're changing scheme like that, someone like Kobe White, not that Anthony Brown was terrible, but this could provide some more opportunities. I will say this, though, going to the betting side of things, I agree with everything you said. But to me, when I look at this game, the strength of Duke's defense is certainly in the secondary. It's not up front where they suffered a bunch of losses. I actually think that if Boston College passes a lot in this game, it plays into Duke's hands, and I am stunned to see the spread going the other way. I feel pretty good with what I saw last week. They lost to Notre Dame, but they held their own. Chase Bryce, no mistakes. He has some guys on the outside. I'm actually targeting Duke on the DFS side of things as well. Have some interest in that stack.
For sure. And you brought up the strength of Duke's defense being their pass defense. I think we need to talk about David Bailey. He's the running back replacing A.J. Dillon. He's also a big bruising back, 6 feet, 235 pounds. He rushed for 844 yards on 148 attempts last year, just spelling A.J. Dillon. He should carry the load here. And you mentioned it. The strength of Duke's defense is their pass defense. They're replacing all 4 of their defensive linemen. When we saw Notre Dame has the best offensive line in the country, arguably, but we saw Notre Dame run all over that team. There's a strong case to be made for David Bailey at 6,900. And I think you mentioned it on the Duke side. Chase Bryce was a guy we talked about a lot last week, just targeting some uncertain players. And he was super cheap. You have to pay a little bit for him on this side. But I like the over in this game. I like Bryce. He can run. When he was with Clemson on just 16 and 14 attempts, he had 93 and 94 yards. He goes for 41 last week. He also throws the ball 38 times. If he's going to throw the ball north of 35 times, you can look to his pass catchers. Jalen Calhoun is 6.6K. He led the team with 7 targets. Jake Bobo is 4.5. And Damon Philyaw-Johnson, their number 3, is still egregiously priced at 3,200. DraftKings doing a really bad job of pricing these number 3 receivers. He actually ran more routes than both Bobo and Calhoun.
This is, of a game where you can stack, it's an easy run back to me with Bailey would be my preferred choice. And then you have, unlike Oklahoma State, you have a ton of salary. This is where you can move to those one-offs that are, the Chuba Hubbards of the world. So I like Duke. Listen, I'm sticking with it. I know, maybe it closes under a field goal and then I'm really probably in trouble, but I am sticking with the Blue Devils. I think they win this game at home. You mentioned you like the over. I believe it's 51 still.
I already bet that.
Yeah. So, well, I'm locked in for 6, so that was not smart. Ah, boy. All right. Let's keep it moving. That's going to be a good one, though. I can't wait to see that. Now we get to USF, who, don't get me started with all the times I've backed them with Charlie Strong in my life, but that's neither here nor there. They go to Notre Dame. We saw both these teams, but just different type of opponents. The Citadel, who's on the slate, was at USF last week, and it was just an ugly game, 27-6. Notre Dame imposed their will late in the game against Duke. Start with USF because I think it's a pretty easy write-off. Do you have any interest in this team?
Well, there's a little bit of drama here. Their offensive coordinator is Charlie Weiss Jr. Going back to Notre Dame. No, I don't think that really matters. This USF team. I guess if we look to what Weiss did, he was at FAU for a while. He runs a pretty fast scheme. 11th in plays per game last year. They threw the ball 49% of the time. However, I just don't know how they are going to compete against Notre Dame here. They're only returning 2 full-time starters in the offensive line. That was an offensive line that ranked 126th out of 130 in sacks allowed last year. Like, Jordan McLeod is going to be under pressure the entire game. Because of that, I don't know how you target any receivers. You have Bryce Miller. Randall St. Felix is kind of a deep threat downfield. He only had 4 targets last week. I think I'm just hands off this USF team, not to mention they have a 12-point team total.
It can't be worse than the Charlie Strong era, though. It just can't. I'm sorry. I hate to be that guy, but the amount of times I backed that team when they had Flowers, too. Anyway, that's, again, Randall St. I just want to give a quick shout out to Randall St. Felix, only in the sense that he has tournament winning upside. I am not saying that's going to happen, but he is a deep vertical threat. He doesn't need the targets to get there. Think of, the over-the-top type players. Still, horrible game environment. I have no interest there. On the other side, I mean, let's start with the backfield. I assume you have Chuba ahead of Kyron Williams, but it's a situation where if in a perfect world you could have both.
Yeah, and I think you can get both. We've talked about a lot of receivers near the minimum. We've talked about receivers in the mid-range. Taj Harris with 15 targets last week. There's certainly ways you can get to both Chuba and Kyron. We thought this was going to be a timeshare, but again, this is another situation we brought up. Target guys like Kyron Williams in unsettled backfields. You missed him. If you didn't play him last week when he was 6,500, now you have to pay $8.4K for this guy. He's still a really nice play. He's just a little bit cost prohibitive. Carries 19 times, gets the 6 targets. Man, I don't have enough good things to say about this guy, and he gets a fantastic matchup here.
I echo everything you said, even though it pains me. With Notre Dame on the outside, a little nose. I'm probably butchering his name. How do you say this guy's name? Skowronek?
Bennett Skowronek.
Skowronek. Somewhat close. He is out. What does that really do? So McKinley, straight goose egg, but I'm not deterred. I actually think you could go right back to him and try to buy low. Do you think they'll need to throw the ball? Does that injury open up some time for maybe some other pass catchers, or is it just stick on the ground?
I think they'll try to run the ball, but they were still fairly balanced last week. If we look at Ian Book, he had a decent number of pass attempts, so they will be balanced. I think you can look at McKinley. He's still expensive. He was 7K last week. He only dropped down to 6.1 despite the goose egg. I think some other plays, Avery Davis was in the slot. He only ran a route on 52% of Notre Dame dropbacks. I wouldn't look to him. But Braden Lenzy makes his return. He is an absolute burner for this team. He's someone they try to get on carries. If I was to liken him to another player, maybe a Deebo Samuel light. And he's expected to start in place of the injured Bennett Skowronek. He's very cheap, so he could be a cheap access point to this game.
Okay, fair enough. And this is another game. Notre Dame, 23.5-point favorite. Over-under of just 48, so that speaks to what you already talked about. South Florida has a miserable implied team total. If I had to take a position, I'd probably lay the points, but I'm not going to bet this game. Probably will just take maybe a stab on the Notre Dame side for DFS. The other game, though, I mentioned I already bet Duke. The other game, and I'm going against the grain here, is the next game up, and one we really got to get into. Central Florida at Georgia Tech. We've got Central Florida coming in as a road favorite. It's just north of a touchdown. It's up to 8 now, actually. Over-under of 63, so good game environment. We'll start with Central Florida, Matt. They've got embarrassment of riches, kind of. They've got so much high upside on offense. It's not even about who's in play. How do you prioritize, this Josh Heupel run team?
Dylan Gabriel projects as the top scoring QB for me. He's the returning starter. Extremely efficient. He's not a guy that saw immense volume. He averaged just 30.6 pass attempts per game, but he also averaged 281 yards passing. That's because this team is incredibly efficient. They run a high octane offense. They're replacing in-house. They were 6th in plays per game last year, passing the ball about 47% of the time. That was middle of the pack. They also are replacing some production on their offensive line, but They were banged up a little bit last year, so they'll be returning 4 dudes who started at least one game. I think that's good for their offense. With Gabriel, I think you want to stack him with a guy like Trey Nixon, who is middling in price, 6.8K, but he's replacing Gabriel Davis, the Bills receiver now. He had 80 targets last year for 830 yards. I think he's got to be the favorite for targets in this game. And if you're just looking for top stacks on the entire slate, I think Dylan Gabriel to Trey Nixon has to be in consideration for top stack.
Do you look to, just working down a guy, and we had this from our premium chat, which, as I always say, no better time to get in there. We have so many sports. We had a question about Marlon Williams for UCF. Do you see a significant drop? You would try to find the money and go get Trey Nixon?
So Marlon Williams is their slot receiver. He, I think, will be, how to put this, maybe less upside, more of like a cash game play, but he still should see a fair number of targets. Last year he had 68 and he ended up with 717 receiving yards. So he was just about 100 yards behind Trey Nixon. I think he's still a fantastic play. He's going to see those high percentage targets coming out of the slot.
And then in the backfield, they obviously employ a ton of guys. They get people involved. We got Otis Anderson. We've got McCray, who I think is actually somewhat interesting, sub 5, sitting at 4,900. Do you attack the backfield? Can you incorporate them with Gabriel and go like a 3-man? How do you decipher the running game if it's late and they are grinding clock?
Yeah, so, in a different context, I'm certainly willing to go to these guys. When I'm trying to pay up for some of the stud receivers, which we just flat out don't have on this slate, I'm more than willing to take shots on Anderson, McCray, even Bentavious Thompson in tournaments because they're implied for so many points. In today's slate, I think you're trying to go the opposite way if you're playing low-risk contests and lock in the touches with running back. So just from an opportunity cost perspective, I'm probably not getting a ton of Anderson, McCray, or Thompson. I think Anderson is probably the preferred play because of his role in the receiving game. He had 41 targets last year, so I think he separates himself a little bit there. But as far as McCray, he comes in with a price discount at 4.9K. He's a guy that was banged up for portions of last year, but still managed to record 529 yards on the ground, just shy of 100 attempts. So if you need the savings, 4,900, not very much to pay for him.
I like him, and I'm on the other side of this game. God, of all the times, and I was telling you before the show, I've never been more disappointed in Florida State than I was last week, and that means something considering all the stuff they've done in recent years. We're going to find out, was that more them, or maybe they found something at Georgia Tech, particularly with Jeff Sims. We both identified that he was too cheap last week. I'm going to say he's too cheap again. He's up to 5,300, but he's mobile. It's good game environment. Talk to me about him and this Georgia Tech offense.
Yeah, you're going to get Jeff Sims as a value for a couple weeks here. The DraftKings pricing algorithm just slowly bumps the price on these guys. So he comes in at 5.3. And with the super flex, you obviously want to play 2 quarterbacks. I think Jeff Sims is a strong consideration here. Props to this Georgia Tech team. Man, they're transitioning from the triple option over to more of a pro style attack, at least a modern day offense. And luckily they recruit Jeff Sims, a 4-star. He is a dual threat. He has over 60 yards rushing last week. But not only that, he attempted 35 passes. He completed 277 yards. That's against a very strong Florida State defense that has a couple NFL players, Asante Samuel, Marvin Wilson on the defensive line. He's going to be a very strong price-adjusted play as long as he's below 6K. So I'm certainly interested in him if you want to stack this game. His receivers are incredibly cheap. We saw Georgia Tech running a fast offense again, so I'm certainly interested in these guys. Their number 1 and number 2 receivers, Jalen Camp and Amarian Brown, they're 4K and 4.3K respectively.
That's what I'm saying. This is the appeal of this slate as we're winding down and we only got a couple games left. You can get some cheap stacks and then build it with some big time one. That's my strategy. We talked about Duke, but this is another game. You can roll Sims and some of these cheap guys and pick a UCF target on the other side. And you have a lot of salary to work with. But what about Mason in the backfield? Any interest there, or is it more Sims to the pass catchers?
The backfield is a complete timeshare. So Jordan Mason, he ends up leading the way rushing. He has 14 carries. But Jamius Griffin, he totals 9 carries himself. And if you just look at how they divvied up snaps, Jamius Griffin was in on 42% of their running back plays. Jordan Mason, he was in on 44%. So that was basically a 1-for-1 split between these guys. They're underdogs here still, so I don't really want to target either of them. If I want someone in the running attack, it'll be just targeting Jeff Sims and then trying to stack him with a pass catcher.
Fair enough. All right. App State and Marshall. Interesting game. We saw Marshall just dominate a garbage opponent. App State certainly did not dominate. I don't want to call them a garbage opponent, but it was Charlotte. They're a 5-point favorite on the road here to Marshall, 59.5. Start with App State. This is a team that's got a lot of experience, certainly at QB with Zach Thomas. We know they want to run the ball. Where do you go, if anywhere?
So you mentioned like Greg McCrae for UCF. I think we have a similar situation with the runners here. They're going to employ a 3-man timeshare between Datrix Harrington, Cameron Peoples, and Marcus Williams. I think Marcus Williams is actually the best play out of these three. He's 4,800, so he's kind of smashed right in between Harrington and Peoples. And the touchdown expectation for these guys is actually reasonable. App State is a team that only throws the ball 39.5% of the time. That was 1/10 in the country last year. Their plays per game is middling, so I'm okay with that. And now they're a decent-sized favorite here who project to run from positive game script. If you're looking for players in this cheap price range at running back, taking a look at Harrington, taking a look at Marcus Williams, I think it can make a lot of sense here.
I kind of like them too, and I see the merit for going to those spots. It's a game that I'm having a little trouble. I'm certainly not betting it. I just don't know exactly what we get from Marshall. We actually just had a question. It's a perfect time to ask you. I know we're jumping around a little bit, but if you had to play Brendan Knox or David Bailey, where would you go?
I would play David Bailey.
As would I.
But it's closer than I think some people probably will admit. You know, Brendan Knox, he's someone that functions in all facets of the game. Last week, of course, they're playing Eastern Kentucky, or 2 weeks ago, I believe this was. They had a break in between, but Brendan Knox, he still carries 18 times, 85 yards in the opener. He bust your lineups, and he was extremely owned. People wanted the West Virginia game out of Brendan Knox, and he just didn't deliver. But he's a guy that actually functions in the pass game too. So if we do see them down and them playing from negative game scripts, I think Brendan Knox will still be involved in the game. This team, it's not like they have a bad team total. It's 27.5. They are expected to put up some points. So just from a contrarian angle, I think Brendan Knox is someone you should consider. Although I do have David Bailey projected for more.
Same. And I'm going to try to find the money for Williams and Hubbard. So he's in a weird spot for me there. Last guy, and then we can move on to the last game. Are you going to, I don't even want to call it chasing, but do you think Grant Wells is that good, or was that an opponent?
So I really do think it was his opponent. He only threw 23 times. This dude tops 300 yards on 23 attempts.
Yeah, 4 touchdowns, easy game, right?
It certainly was. And that very well could have been Brendan Knox with 4 touchdowns. He breaks the slate, and now he's one of the most owned plays today. Instead, people are going to chase Grant Wells.
Yeah, there's Pickett, Bryce. There's a multitude of cheaper quarterbacks that I would go to before I went to Grant Wells. The final game, the Citadel. About 50-point underdog. I think it's like 46 or something like that. At Clemson, let's get them out of the way. I assume you're not using anyone from the Citadel.
No, they run a weird offense, man. They're using a lot of
Yeah, that's an understatement.
So sometimes they're out there with 4 wide, but they have a fullback on the field. Like, it's super weird. Anyway, they lost to South Florida, so I don't think you're looking at them. They only passed 29% of the time too, so you can't target any of the receivers.
No, don't. They're a throwaway. On the other side, though, I know it sounds crazy, but Clemson is kind of a throwaway. Lawrence, Etienne, Rogers, these guys are not going to see the field late. Dixon is always that guy, but he's coming back from injury. Where do we go? Is there any cheap running back that may get enough run to warrant, I guess I should say?
This is a really weird situation. So they had a bunch of guys hurt last week. Dixon didn't play. Ches Malusi didn't play. Michael Dukes didn't play. So we saw Darian Rencher and a guy named Kobe Pace carrying. For me, it's just look who's active. And that you're not going to know because this game is in the late slate, which makes it even more difficult to target. But I think if you want to play a running back on Clemson, I mean, Etienne always could get up over 100 yards on like 6 carries. So he's in play solely because of that, but I don't like him, and I certainly won't have a lot of him. Lin J, I don't know why they're even considering playing him. You know, the guy got hurt in camp. Why are they even talking about it? Yeah,
that doesn't make a ton of sense. And then, like, you know, Clemson just reloads on the outside. Like, Higgins is gone. Ross is hurt. They got dudes on dudes with Nada and Ladson. And I still don't know if this is the spot to really stretch their legs. against the Citadel. They're just going to have so many bodies in there. I think you can get away with going away from Clemson and just focusing on the more competitive games here.
Agreed.
Okay, good. Well, we've done it. A couple things before we bounce on out of here. Like I said, just to summarize for me, I know you like that over in the BC Duke game. I like Duke. I like Georgia Tech today. We still have an hour to lock. I know you will be around answering some questions. Tell everyone they can find you at Twitter. Handles right below. Follow them. You've got so much good content. Your cheat sheet is posted on Awesemo. That is the blueprint. If you are playing this slate, go and find that article. It's right on the homepage. You need to read it. It has literally everything you need for this slate. Any final thoughts, Matt, before we bounce on out of here?
No, I think we touched on everything. My favorite bet is the over in that Boston College game, but take that for what it's worth. I went over 2 of my bets last week. So, I mean, we're still dealing with a lot of unknowns at this point in the season. But yeah, I think that's it. I'm excited for the slate, man.
Me too. Guys, hit the like button on your way out, but don't go anywhere. The NFL Strategy Show is coming up next. Jeff Ulrich, Greg Ehrenberg, going to take you up to lock. We got so many things. The MMA is later. I'll probably be hitting Matt up for answers on that because I don't know what I'm doing. All I know is that anaconda choke is a real thing. I say that whenever I can. On that note, good luck this week in college football. I'll see you guys tomorrow morning with Alex Baker and Dave Loughran for the NFL Deeper Dive. See you guys then. Take care.